Hope this isn't too far out of your wheelhouse, Bryce. It does rock a little bit more.
Hey, I remember you from earlier. Welcome to a Thursday Collection Connection, where we're playing that game that's just an excuse to talk about records. I play the game with my brother, Plastic Eric from the Plastic Soundwave Cult. We ping videos back and forth at each other, him every Monday, me every Thursday, and you can follow along by subscribing to both channels. In Eric's last video, he talked about Jethro Tull's Stand Up album. I admit I think I have a bit of a mental block about Jethro Tull, not coming from a place of having experienced a lot of Jethro Tull, but a very strong mental image of what they project, what I think that they would sound like, and it's not good. But the album Stand Up, which was their second album, actually I think caught a sweet spot where they were introducing some folk sounds into their kind of heavier hard rock sound, and they had not quite yet gone prog, and so it was a pretty good listen. I enjoyed it, especially by the time of the last couple of songs. The very last song, something about mothers, was a banger. It was a really good song, and it ended perfectly. Really closed out the album on a high note, and then the song came back for another minute. So at 3:15, it was a perfect ending. But then it came back for another noodling minute, and it felt like the portent of the prog that was just on the horizon. So I looked up some more about him. I'm not crazy. Future albums, near future albums like Aqualung and Thick as a Brick were basically one track per side of an album, and that is really the kind of thing that tires me out after a while. But yeah, everything about Stand Up was surprisingly good. I enjoyed it. And when I queued it up to listen to it on Apple Music, I saw something that gave me an immediate idea of where to go for my connection. And so my connection from this 1969, I think, album to a 1986 album that I think is the first time I've repeated a band now on this during this game through 60 some videos, comes from a 2016 occurrence. And that is that in 2016, both Jethro Tull's Stand Up and this album received a 5.1 surround sound mix by Steven Wilson. And so my connection is XTC's Skylarking from 1986. I've mentioned before that I'm a big XTC fan, and this was the first album that I ever owned from them. I received a cassette of it from a pen pal who, within 6 or 7 years of that, would be my wife. And so my future wife gave me my first XTC, and it was Skylarking on cassette. And I was just kind of coming into my own musically, and I just knew enough about XTC, or thought I knew just enough about XTC, to notice that the single that I had been seeing on 120 Minutes, Dear God, which was, to my knowledge, from Skylarking, was not actually on the cassette that I received. It turns out rather famously that Dear God appeared as the B-side for the first single from the album, which I probably should have looked up. It was maybe Grass. And DJs started to flip it and play the B-side instead. And so after an initial printing without it, all the subsequent printings had Dear God on it, at least in the US. I'm not sure how that went around the world. Knowing that, and just a couple weeks ago, I talked about the Erasure CDs. That were the first 2 CDs that I ever bought before I had a CD player. The third CD I ever bought was XTC's Skylarking, because it did have Dear God on it. And I already knew I liked the song, and I wanted to like the album because I liked the girl that gave me the tape. And so, having owned it on cassette and then on the CD, it happens to be one of the titles that I've bought the most in my life, because I don't have either of those 2 versions in my hand anymore. I've never owned it on vinyl, but I did buy, it's one of the few, and maybe possibly the only, Mobile Fidelity Sound Lab CD I've ever bought. And then I did buy the 2016 Steven Wilson remix that included both a 5.1 remix and a new stereo mix built from that 5.1 mix. So I bought it at least, or not, I've had it at least 4 different times in 4 different variations. It's a great record. It is their high mark of relevancy in the US. I came to understand that I actually knew a number of XTC singles from my time in England, where I didn't necessarily clock who did every song. But I came to find out, I actually know some XTC in the form of Generals and Majors and Making Plans for Nigel and songs like that. So it wasn't long. The album didn't make a huge impression on me initially, and it sort of annoyed me that Dear God wasn't on it. But it was a real education in kind of coming around and getting familiar with a piece of music in order for it to really sink its claws in. And when it clicked, it really clicked in. And it wasn't that long before Oranges and Lemons came out. So I got Oranges and Lemons pretty hot on the heels of Skylarking. And then between Oranges and Lemons and None Such, I ended up picking up a good portion of their back catalog. And rest is sort of history. It's a great record. I think it is probably my favorite set of Colin Moulding songs, contributions as a whole to a record. I love Sacrificial Bonfire as a way to close the album. It has a forced concept. The album was not written as a concept album, but again, somewhat famously, especially within the XTC circles, this album was produced by Todd Rundgren, who they got specifically to try to make them more palatable, to try to break them in the US, which ended up working. But it was a very contentious process. And Andy Partridge and Todd Rundgren especially butted heads quite a bit. Andy Partridge has since come around and sort of grudgingly given Todd Rundgren credit for pulling some really great music out of them. But Rundgren was also the one who, I think, based on the submitted material, thought, probably because of the title Summer Cauldron and Season Cycle, it put him in mind of something cyclical, and it's sort of he sequenced the album in sort of a bunch of sort of cycles all in one, sort of life in a day. So it's sort of morning to evening, spring to winter, birth to death. And it doesn't work like a charm because it was not written with that stuff in mind. And I think it probably takes until Ballet for a Rainy Day for the album to really kick in for me. I like Summer's Cauldron, but it's floaty. It's a strange way to begin an album. But from Ballet for a Rainy Day on, they're just great tracks over and over. And so, yeah, Man Who Sailed Around His Soul, love it. 1,000 Umbrellas, love it. and so on and so forth. It's a lot of really top-notch material, well deserved as one of their most lauded albums, even if it isn't necessarily my favorite. Still a great record. And so, knowing that I've probably gone on well longer than I should, I will pass on XTC's Skylarking from 1986 over to Eric. And you can look for his response next Monday to see what he will connect that to within his collection. So, if you made it all the way to the end, I thank you for watching.